Don't you think it's about time for a podcast that's more fulfilling? One that's about the vibrant exchange of ideas and perspectives that happens when we actually come together. We got you covered. Welcome to the Deep Blue Project, where the depths of conversation meet the waves of personal experience. This is a real, raw, and unscripted show about everything from leadership lessons to self-awareness, wellness, and the latest current events. We cover it all. We have a rotating cast of guests as we share our personal stories, insights, and opinions on the issues that matter most. Plus, we have a blast while doing it. The Deep Blue Project. It's not just a podcast, it's an experience. And now your host, Chris Workman.
Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to this session of the Deep Blue Project. I would like to bring on a great person, a person I've been seeing a lot on LinkedIn. We're kind of linked with a lot of the same people. We touch base and talk to the same people, and his name is Chris Hsiung. He is part of the Curve now, but prior to that, he's a previous police chief with Mountain View Police Department, and then he was the undersheriff in San Mateo County for a little bit. So welcome, Chris. Welcome to the Deep Blue Project. Glad to have you.
Thanks, Christopher, and it's just a pleasure and honor to be here.
So some of the things I'd like you to kind of give on is just like your background in law enforcement. A lot of our people might not know you too much. Some, I'm sure a lot of our listeners do touch base with the Curve. We're all linked to the kind of same people, but kind of how, your law enforcement background kind of led you to where you are today.
Sure. I was one of those guys that knew that they wanted to be a cop in high school, actually even younger than that. So I became an explorer in the city that I grew up in, went off to college and got picked up by Mountain View PD. And if your listeners don't know where Mountain View is, it's really in the heart of Silicon Valley. So a few companies your listeners might recognize, like LinkedIn, Facebook, Intuit, Netscape. These are all companies that started and had headquartered in Mountain View. I grew up in that agency, worked there 28 years and did my rotations through predominantly half on the investigative side and then half on the tactical side, doing the SWAT stuff for about 13 years. And as I started to promote up through the ranks, I started to kind of learn not only about leadership, but about myself, like what my style was and really finding my voice, maybe not even getting totally comfortable with my leadership voice until I was a captain. Fortunate enough and honored to be selected as their police chief. Did a couple years there before I was recruited over to the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, like you mentioned. The incumbent sheriff basically said, "Hey, I'd like you to be my undersheriff." And I actually had to find out, what's an undersheriff, right? Because if you grow up on the police side, you don't really know these terms as well. But, it's the number two. It's the chief operating officer, if you will. And that was tremendous because it was an opportunity for me to go back. It's San Mateo County is where I live, where I grew up, where I raised my kids. And so to come back to a jurisdiction that really you take care of not only an agency, but also your own family and friends. So did that for about a year and a half. And then in between all of that was meeting Simon and the other founding board members of the Curve and just aligning behind this passion of really understanding where the culture of policing has been, where it needs to go, and the responsibility of leaders within our profession to really push forward and modernize the culture and modernize how we lead and how we train up our next generation of leaders.
Right. Well, that leads into a great part of where I want to go with this, because a lot of what we're dealing with now is, I think you and I are probably close to around the same kind of age. So the way we were taught and the way we were brought up with things when it comes on the leadership side of it, we're all, it seems, kind of just learning that in the last few years, really embracing what that meant. I had a discussion not too long ago about how we were taught years ago. It was like you just followed the lead of whoever was in front of you. So if they were a crappy leader, like if they were just an aggressive, and we've all had them, like I had them, leaders that just led with fear and led with, just nastiness. Like they weren't the nurturing type of leaders that we're trying to build today. They were more like, do this or else. And I was kind of one of them people that was brought up in that. Like, so when I started, moving on to like sergeant and places where I was I found myself doing that. And I didn't know it at the time. I thought that was the only way to be. But I think we're learning that. And some of the stuff that I've seen that you're doing, and you guys talk leadership a lot. And it's impressive because we all know it's nice to have someone behind you that has name recognition. I mean, because people listen more, like how
Sure.
that works. Having Simon Sinek behind the curve, it's people take that because he's a well-known voice. But you guys are also still starting to do that. So how did you that kind of come about? I think before we really get into some leadership stuff, how did that kind of take place? Because I know a bunch of the people that you are on the curve with through LinkedIn. We're LinkedIn or we chat or we talk to each other. So
Yeah, it was the summer of 2020, if you'll recall, when kind of the world's on fire and the fire's on fire, and we especially in Mountain View, we enjoyed a great relationship with our community, and suddenly we have protests coming down the street, and people surrounding the police departments. Out of that work, I don't know if people understand or know Simon's background. He actually did his undergraduate work with the Massachusetts State Troopers, right, and embedded for a couple months, just studying policing. And then obviously he's gone off and become highly successful. He does a lot of training with military and different units. So he was already very much tied into the IACP network, having keynoted the conference a few times. And so if anyone's read his third book, Infinite Game, he actually profiles the Castle Rock Police Department in Colorado. And the chief there is Chief Jack Cawley. So in that summer of 2020, Simon reaches out to Jack and says, "Hey, can you touch base with some of the forward, modern-minded leaders that through the network, and let's get on a Zoom call." And for me personally, here's where it kind of goes full circle: is studying for the sergeant's test. My chief at the time actually put Starts With Why, Simon's first book, on the reading list. So I was a longtime fan already. So here I am sitting on a Zoom call with a bunch of chiefs and Simon. And I'm kind of pinching myself at that moment. Those Zoom calls turn into quarterly calls, which turns into a retreat. And we start to really talk about and dive deep into what's the history of policing, what are the issues. And you very quickly you find out that we don't have a national police force. So there's like 18,000 different agencies, which have 18,000 different cultures and 18,000 different, communities. And so there is one thing that unites us all, though. It's just the culture of policing. If we're being real honest with ourselves, we are more influenced in our culture by Hollywood and the movies and the TV shows, that cop shows that they make, than we as leaders ourselves are influencing the people that work within it, right? And that's the tail wagging the dog. And so out of that comes this effort to make, we started the nonprofit about 4 years ago, and a bunch of chiefs and sheriffs from across the country. And so even though it's Simon's ideas and stuff, you have a founding board of people that are just in it from across the country. But, as police chiefs, we had great ideas. We had very little time to execute. And so no shortage of ideas. But in the last year and a half or so, I left the sheriff's office, and that's when the opportunity opened up to take on the executive director role. And it's been encouraging. It's been a privilege to just travel the country and just sharing this inspiration, right? We actually don't see ourselves as a training outfit. Far from it. We actually see ourselves as part of a social movement. Like, we want to show up and provide that inspiration, that light bulb to the leaders in the room, because we're not here to tell you that, agency A, you have to do A through Z, and there you go, you're going to fix it. It's not up to us. We want to provide that inspiration, that spark, where that leader, that chief or sheriff in the room listens and hears that and goes, wow, I have an idea now. Now I see a path forward on how to bring about change.
right. So you touch on something that's great because I don't know, as I move forward in the things that I've started to do over the last year and a half, when it comes to wellness and stuff, I've also have two things that I'm very much ingrained into. One of them is I became more ingrained in the ICP itself. I was the vice chair of the small department section. So we're talking about, so my passion, obviously being from a small department, is now I am the chair of that department. So I represent for the ICP, those agencies across the nation that are 50 and under or have 500,000 or less people. But as well as I do, like, we encompass most of the police forces in the nation, but we don't embrace that. I mean, the hard part is what we're trying to do is say, like, you have that voice. However, you're not using the impact that it has, because what I've found over the years is it's so much easier for us to integrate change or change leadership or change the way we do things in a smaller agency, because as chiefs or as captains or whatever we are, we touch more more of the people within our organization. So that change can happen whether it's top down, whether it's, the lieutenant level down, whether it's the sergeant level down. That change can happen a little more easier than it seems to be happening or can happen in bigger, large city agencies. So some of that stuff is, I think, to your point, is we're trying to learn to do that now, and I don't think it's we do have learning organizations. Again, I got full disclosure, I'm on the board of a leadership organization as it is, but as we can teach our people things and how they do things, but yet you need these other entities. There has to be something that touches them and makes them change. There has to be, to your point, when you guys put out what, your messages, your blogs or your videos or your stuff, it's stuff that is inspiring people to look for that change. So how do you see this moving forward as far as, 'cause you say it's 2000, so there's some of us who realize it, be like, they only think the curve came out in the last year.
Uh-huh.
So you guys have been building this for a while.
Yeah, yeah, and we're constantly learning and listening too. We understand that the conclusions we might have reached a couple years ago could be outdated already. So we're constantly learning and listening to leaders. And the really interesting takeaway is just in the last couple of years, what we've noticed that the people taking and consuming our content are mostly middle managers and line level supervisors. And one of the most searched terms on our website is, what do I do if my boss doesn't get it? I mean, that is if that's an indictment on the leadership across the country of the chiefs and sheriffs, right, trust is a huge commodity that it's an issue. Like you look at the surveys, trust is one of those big things. And so, what we hope to do is learn from that, because we know, and you've probably seen this, the turnover at the top ranks, at the middle management ranks. I mean, it used to be a chief might sit in that chair for 5+ years. Now it's like 2 to 3. And the person behind them might have 2 to 3 years as opposed to a decade of experience. And so, that's both a liability and an opportunity, right? We have a tremendous opportunity in this country as leaders. And when I say leaders, I define that as anyone, regardless of their rank, regardless of their position, sworn or professional staff. There's a tremendous opportunity to move this profession forward, take the greatest parts that we have from our history, carry that through with us, but also evolve and really stress and emphasize leadership over just like management skills.
Right. When we see that across the board, right? Policing is definitely changing the way we have to approach things. When I first came on, you had that, I want to call it's an archaic value now. I mean, that we look at things and we say, do this or else. The old adage of, you know, ask, tell, make, which is what we all kind of came up with, but we don't, that's not how we do business anymore. That is just not policing in this century. We can't do that. But we still have individuals, unfortunately, out there still trying to do that, which is hurting, the culture of policing now, because what do we see on TV all the time? I mean, they're going to show you the negativity. They're going to show you the bad parts of the job because that's what makes money. So as we see that going forward, I think that's where that leadership value from everyone comes into play. For me, it was a drastic change for me because I had to sit and realize that I was just doing it all wrong. I mean, but you have to open yourself up to be able to see that. And the egos that we have, unfortunately, early in our careers is, we know everything, and then as you move up, you don't know everything. And once you realize that, and once I realized that and said, I was able and willing to let one of my people who I very trust in my office look at me and go, Chief, you're being a real jerk right now. Like, how would that go over in 20
Right.
years ago?
Right. Totally. I mean, we've all worked for that one sergeant who knew it all. And not only that is he or she wanted to create carbon copies of themselves and they would evaluate you that way. Right. But, it wasn't until later in my career that I figured out is I didn't have to be like that person to be successful. I actually had a different skill set. Right. I often joke when I speak, I say, I'm terrible at narcotics investigations. I just don't have that skill set. But if I worked for one of those sergeants I mean, where does that put me on the popularity chart, right? But we need a culture where a leader, a sergeant, walks onto a team and goes, I'm not going to make carbon copies of myself. I'm going to do what I can to create a team environment where each of you thrives and it becomes the best version of themselves. And I'm here to support that. And can you imagine, like, you just start replicating that through the ranks, what that police organization would look like?
Well, one of the things that I thought of, especially running, having a small agency, so currently I have 8 people in my agency. I have 5 full-timers, which includes me, and I have 3 part-timers. So when I'm looking for people as a department that size, and there's a lot of departments my size, so this is not just me, like, across the nation, you know, some people had said to me, I had a council person ask me one time when we were hiring, like, I had 3 people in the queue to hire, and they were allowing me to hire one, and I got through and I never hired any of the 3 of them. And they kind of got upset with me, like, "We need bodies. Why didn't you hire them?" I said, "Because they just wouldn't fit here in this dynamic. They would actually, we'd be paying for a person to go through that process, and we'd end up losing them anyway because they would not be happy here, or they would just not fit in a small town agency. Because we have to have diversity within our ranks because we're so small, we don't get the amount of people. So trying to get through that, to have people who like to do traffic and people who like to do detective work and people who like to do drug work, you got to filter that out. I mean, and we see that now, that I think some of that turnover, some of that things we're seeing is just that, is that people are going places or they're hiring for need and they're finding out that the individual they hired just really doesn't suit them because maybe they want to be a canine. I'll never have a canine unit, or they want to be on a motorcycle, and you're not going to have that.
Right.
So
Right.
you end up losing them people anyway, which is hurting you in the long run. So knowing that from the beginning might slow down some of that problem that we're having with small departments or small agencies losing people at that kind of a rate. So I want to get into a little bit more about one of the things we kind of talked about before we started, is some of the ideas that we're coming up with as far as leadership is. And one of the big things being talked about now on LinkedIn a lot is just, I guess we're calling it check the box or box check in leadership. A lot of that we see in wellness right now, where people are developing, they're looking at something and saying, okay, I now have a wellness program, and they're like, I have an EPA, or I have resources, but yet they're not really following up beyond that. I mean, are you seeing kind of that also kind of occurring with some of the people you're talking with?
Yeah, so one of the advantages of being on the curve is traveling all over the country and getting this perspective of not just from the agencies that I kind of grew up in here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but across the country. And you can tell very quickly when a department or an organization has a chief who really buys into it, or they just have a program because they kind of have to, right? And it just feels different, looks different. And one of the litmus tests is you can ask the line level people, like, are they encouraging each other to go seek these wellness type of resources? Or is it just something that admin's pushing down and no one's really buying into, right? And so, like anything else, to avoid this checking the box thing, it all comes back to culture. What's the department culture as it relates to, you can fill in the blank. And in this case, what's the department culture of any agency as it relates to wellness? And this requires the people at the top to actually model what that looks like. That requires them to, I hate to use the term vulnerable. It has a negative connotation. It's not. It actually takes more courage as a leader to be vulnerable. Simon recently just spoke about this at a conference, and he says, instead of vulnerable, I've actually started to use the phrase available. Are leaders available to show and share what they've been through? Because we've all worked those really bad cases, right? But it takes a leader to model that to the troops and say, I know exactly what you're feeling and what you're about to go through. And I would encourage you to seek these resources because this is how it worked for me, right? But the pride and ego that comes with old school policing means you don't talk about that. You don't even acknowledge it. And you're weak if you do, right? So this is what we're up against. And that's why the culture change is so important, is to embody that it just makes it normal.
I had the opportunity to do that. So I started the Deep Blue Project last year. And a lot of that had to do with my own personal journey and personal things that I dealt with. And one of those things I had to do is I had to actually go in and put myself in front of my people and say, hey, this is what I was going through. So this is what was going on. And let them, and you're right, it's not an easy thing to do, because You're supposed to be the head of the department, the person that everybody comes to. But that's one thing we talk about a lot, right? Is who does that chief go to? Who does the person, where do they go? Because that's the fear that was put in us. And I talk about this when I go out and speak is first and foremost, I mean, when you say stigma, it's more of a fear. It was a fear that was ingrained from us from the day we walked into an academy. It's the fear that they put into us saying, you got to be, you got to be the strong person. You have to be in control. You have to be this. You have to be that. You have to put on your big boy pants. You move on. You got to, but we're realizing now, and fortunately for some of us, and unfortunate for some people who unfortunately are taking their own lives because we know the suicide rate in law enforcement is astronomical right now, but is trying to change that value and having leaders that are not just checking the boxes, but they're using that. And when I say leaders, I'm not just talking about the chief. I'm talking about those individuals because you can be that sergeant area and be there for your people underneath that. So you can't go. Okay, so yeah, the chief should probably leave because he probably doesn't. He's probably been there so long, and I get in trouble for that all the time when I tell people like it might be time for you to quit. I mean, because if you're not helping your people, you're not helping anyone. But we know they're not going to go away quietly, right? Because that's been their career. That's their life. And that's why we see people who are in their 60s, unfortunately, doing this job as chiefs in small agencies. I'm not knocking you guys who are great at doing your job. Please don't come after me for saying you're not. But the values that we had growing up, because I had them myself, is this was a career. This is what no matter what happened, we're getting ourselves through it. But some of us got to realize this is a different day and age. I mean, this is a time when we need to take care of our people and show them that not only we taking care of them, but we're there for their families also, because that's important. And
Yeah.
it's important for the kids coming out nowadays. We talk about that also. Is they have a better sense of wellness than we ever had, like ever. So if you and I'm gonna come back to something you just sent me because I saw you did post that article or the blog earlier today. I think that came back for me to that first important point, and it's two things: is self awareness and mindset. They're the two things that I had to go with in the beginning. So if you want to like kind of expand on that self awareness part and how we look at that, and that's an important part of being in that leadership role.
Yeah, and we put out blogs a couple times a week. And so that's at thecurve.org. They're all free. There's a leadership resource library. And, one of the things we've talked about is self-awareness is a key skill of any leader. It's really hard in our culture. If you think about this, and I think this applies to almost every police and sheriff's office across the country, is typically speaking, when that promotional announcement comes out for sergeant, right? By default, almost, it's like it typically goes to the person who's the most proactive, makes the most arrests. Those are important skills, 100%. It's a big core of what we do. But the skills to lead a team are very different than the skills to make great casework. And now you're talking about lieutenant, even more important. It's less about doing things. It's more about creating environments where people can thrive, right? And so the other missing element that we don't teach, like once we've promoted the people, we send them to these schools to get certified, and they're check the box. They basically teach them how not to get sued. But, what about courses on how to be a great listener, how to have a difficult conversation, or, to your point, how to have self-awareness? It's the leaders that are sitting in a room and they don't focus on what they say. Here's the big difference. They focus on how people hear them. And if they can pick up on that, how you're seen and how you're heard in any group, could be a patrol briefing setting, it could be a community event. That's like a superpower, but it's a skill set that the great leaders have and the terrible leaders don't. In fact, I've come across narcissistic leaders who have zero awareness of how they're showing up in any setting, and they're talking and they're patting themselves on the back because they feel great about what they just said. Meanwhile, everybody in the room is like they're looking at each other through the glances, and it's that awareness to understand like that's a skill. And so for your leaders out there, you have to think about, so now that we've promoted people, what courses, what books, what podcasts, what trainings can we expose them to that will help hone those skills to make them better leaders? not better officers who just happen to have stripes, but they're just going out there back on the street trying to out arrest their whole team.
Yeah, I had I'm gonna be I mean, quite honestly, I had initially when I a few years ago, I had that issue. Like, I would think that I had it I when I was saying something that it wasn't a big deal, but then people went, "Chief," or my wife would go, "Chris, it's how you said it. The way you came
Yeah,
across with what you said was not, I get what you're trying to tell me now, but that's not the way you portrayed it. That's not the way it came out of your mouth." And we thought think there's nothing wrong with it. And it's as you say, it's skills. You have to work at it. You have to learn to change those, behaviors. You got to realize, I think something that I had to look at and go, this is an ongoing process because I'm learning to change my own way of doing things that I've been doing 57 years old now. So I was doing it for 50 years, 40 plus years, that you're trying to change that way that you do things. And it takes a conscious effort to do that. And sometimes you have to allow your people, I think, to say, and I've given my people that permission to go, hey, if I'm sliding, I don't mind you going, hold on a minute, chief, or hold on a minute. Like
right.
you're kind of crossing, you're doing good, but you're crossing that line again. And it gives you a minute to kind of go, okay. So sometimes you have to give permission to people to check you because they don't feel that they can do that because you're the chief of police or you're the captain or you're whoever above them in the rank and order. And we know how that works because we have that militaristic, style that they don't feel that they can say anything to you because you're above. But if you give them permission to do that, and I mean in a respectful way, let me get right here. I'm not
Sure.
telling you people should be screaming at you like you're their, subordinate. But if you gave them a minute to recognize that they could look at you in a calm manner and just go, hey, you're really can you give me a minute? Like you're going a little bit overboard. Like,
Yeah,
I think we
there's a
don't
phrase we
yeah.
go ahead. There's a phrase we like to use at the Curve when we talk about communication, and that's it's not what you say, it's what people hear. And on top of that, communication isn't just hearing words; it's hearing and understanding the meaning of the words being spoken, right? And but that flies against what we're taught in the academy, which is if you show up on a call, you control the scene, and oftentimes it means talking over people, right? And so I get it; we have to control the scene, 100%. But if you really want to communicate with someone, and the tenured, really great sergeants we've all worked for, you know how they can just like listen to anybody and just calm the situation down. That skill is basically making someone feel heard, right? And so if we can employ that skill internally to our own people, supervisor to officer or professional staff relations, then we can trust that we've taught them, even modeled what that looks like, and they're going to do it out in the street in the community. But the opposite is true too. If we talk down to our people because we have the rank, they're going to talk down to the community because they have the authority. And that generally doesn't work well for any sort of relationship of trust.
Right. Right. And that kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning. That's the way we when the people are doing what you're teaching them or what you're allowing them to do. So if they see you doing that, they're just going to model that behavior because a lot of them, they don't know any better. They think that's the way to do things. And that's kind of how we learned, unfortunately, growing up in this business and being this as a career. Whoever your FTO was, I liken it to that's why I kind of switch my people now between different people so they get a taste of everybody. Like it seemed to be, excuse me, that, if we put somebody with a traffic officer, they became more traffic oriented.
Yeah,
If we put
totally.
somebody with a guy who didn't like traffic but liked to investigate crimes or dug real deep into issues, they became that person. It's the same way with their attitude and what the way they're teaching them that leadership from the day one, not trying to teach it to them 10 years down the road.
Yep, 100%.
And that's what leads to some good things about the internet and some bad things about the internet. Some of the good things are the access that people have to the Curve and to other things and to LinkedIn and to they can gravitate towards people that can teach them that can give them that skill set. But I think that's got to come also from the departments also, so they're not going off and learning something from someone they really shouldn't be pulling things from, that you're trying to find resources that would be, don't want to say approved resources, but genuine or authentic resources that allow them to learn the right way, not the
Yeah.
wrong way.
Yeah. Here's one of the biggest ironies is we pride ourselves on being paramilitary, right? We like to do the cool stuff. We like to wear the cool stuff. Well, the military has actually evolved. Like they send their best and brightest to these command colleges and universities, and they have a reading list that just has nothing to do with the military. They teach them all sorts of stuff. Yet in our profession, typically speaking, we're learning from our own, which there's a lot of good stuff. And I chuckle when I say this is we tend to learn from all the retired guys and gals. Well, I'm a retired person now, but what my point being is there's not a lot of checking out all the breadth of experience and leadership stuff that's out there in other sectors, right? So I would encourage your listeners, read about leadership in the healthcare industry, in the restaurant business. Simon did a webinar with a guy by the name of Will Gadara. And Will Gadara wrote a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. His journey on that book is taking a restaurant called 11 Park Madison in New York and growing it into the number one restaurant on the planet. And we did that webinar, and I can't tell you how many policing personnel wrote back and said that was one of the best webinars. We never imagined we'd have that many takeaways, leadership takeaways from a restaurateur. But yet, if you think about it, Will is the owner of a restaurant, and he leads people who serve people in the community. Now, I think that's pretty similar to us. We lead people who serve the community, right? And so, we're selling ourselves short by only limiting what we learn from just ourselves. We need to really branch out as an industry and make it normal to learn from everyone around us.
Yeah, I think when I started to go back to college, which I did late in life, I was never a big reader. Like I did not read a lot in my 30s or early 30s, 20s. I wasn't a big reader. When I finally decided to go back to college and I started actually reading and finding out these books, because now it's not standard textbooks anymore for those of you who haven't been in college for years. A lot of it is that. It's reading, and especially if you're taking like leadership or emotional intelligence courses or things like that, you're reading these books that are like what you're talking about. They're more business related. And I remember one of the books that we had to read was The McDonaldization of Society, which was a sociological book, which kind of looked at how that was built and how we kind of do things in society nowadays. And that moves on to, the books from, Daniel Goleman and emotional intelligence and all of these other individuals are putting things out there. But reading has become for me something that's way more important. I feel that I pick more things and learn more things out of that now that I use more in everyday work as I'm still on the job than I ever used anything in a law enforcement text. So having that broader, you know, I try to pass that broader thing along to others. A friend of mine, Matt Davis, he just he's all like he reads constantly. He's putting stuff on LinkedIn all the time that he's reading a new book and putting that out there. You know, I think is to your point does two things. It helps you become even more self aware, but it also changes, I think, your mindset. And that's what my big thing is. I think your mindset has to be right or nothing else works for any of that. Because you're constantly learning each and every day. You guys do that. You have that group that does that where you guys talk to each other and have things going on. And I'm going to plain shameless plug. I am part of the Curve Network. I do see all these things that come out, which is great because you don't have to look at it all, but you find things, little nuggets of places that might be something that you're dealing with, or little nuggets of things you might want to learn on that you can pick that out. So, what is your guys kind of? We're drawing up on a little bit of time here, so I kind of want to see what is the curves kind of process, or where do you guys see this thing moving? In the near future to kind of broaden that out as far as what you're doing.
Right. The short term is we're really hitting all the different like state association conferences, the IACPs. I'm an organization of 1.5, and I'm the one, right? Employee one of 1.5. And so the challenge is we have to scale too. So in this first year or two, we're really just trying to get the word out. What's nice about technology is it allows us to kind of hit a lot. We've even been up to Canada and there's interest in it. And so, we're going to continue to grow, continue to provide these free resources on that website. Simon, I meet with them regularly and we just talk about these police issues. And the great thing about the Curve is it puts us into the network of the leaders that he associates with and he learns from, right? And then my job and the job of the founding board members is we basically take those discussions and thoughts and goes, well, how do we apply this to policing, right? It's great. And so down the road, of course, we want to start looking at potentially, training classes for agencies, maybe helping out with cultural assessments and stuff like that. That's all on the horizon. But for now, we're just trying to get the word out.
Well, I truthfully want to thank you guys for what you're doing. There's a lot of good information out there. You guys have put out, as you said, every day you're putting things out. You have video snippets, you have blogs, you have things that we can learn from that, and I continue to learn from that. So if you are on LinkedIn, check out the Curve Network. There's no cost. You don't have to pay anything for it. They just agree whether they allow you on or not, which is cool. They let me on, so you're fine. So, but allowing yourself to broaden that horizon, I think will help you in the long run to also see more, because we don't want to, I'm not going to sit here and berate leaders for what they're doing. I mean, I was in that mold of being a person who just didn't, be straight up. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I wasn't doing it the right way. It took a little while to do that, but have that mindset to change that and keep learning at it. So it's not because you've been doing this a long time that you can't change the way you think about things. Just kind of open up your mind to some new ideas. So I'm going to leave Chris to kind of finish this up, give you a little kind of closeout about the Curve and some of the things that you may be interested in. And then we are going to let you go. And hopefully one of these days, we might get Simon to say hello. I don't know. I'm going to have to work on Chris for that.
Yeah.
So the floor is yours, Chris.
Awesome. Thanks for this opportunity to share with you and your listeners. We're passionate about what we do. And I just encourage everybody to follow us on LinkedIn. As you mentioned, we have an Instagram account at thecurve.org. And also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with my Instagram account. It's chris.hsiung. Most of all, that website, thecurve.org, just click on the resource library. We put all of our videos and articles there. We're constantly just adding stuff. And it's all free. That's the greatest part of it. And if there's anything we can do to support you and your journey, please reach out. I'm always on LinkedIn, probably more than I should be. And that's how you and I met up. And so, feel free to reach out if we can ever be of assistance.
Well, I thank you very much for your time, Chris. I know you're very busy and got some things going on. We thank you for what you're doing. We thank you for taking this forward. Thank you for your service also. Appreciate you being out there doing, what you did. So he's actually coming at it he's been one of us. He's done the job. So it's not somebody talking about something he doesn't know. I know that that's something that we do a lot, as we're very cynical as police officers or former police officers. It takes some of that, but when it's coming from one of our brothers or sisters who are doing something and trying to do something good to help our community and help law enforcement progress as a whole, we always thank you for that time. So thank you guys for listening to the Deep Blue Project. We appreciate it today. As always, stay safe, and we'll see you on the next one.
You've been listening to the Deep Blue Project. As a father, husband, friend, and someone who loves to chat about anything and everything, Chris brings over 3 decades of public service experience to the table. With a background in firefighting and law enforcement, along with degrees in criminal justice and behavioral science, he's seen it all, and he's learned a thing or two along the way. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on LinkedIn and X at Deep Blue Project. Find our website at deepblueproject.com. And to reach out, send an email to deepblueproject@outlook.com. Keep keeping it real, and we'll see you next time on the Deep Blue Project.